Welcome to a little presentation on the English language reading paper question 1. This will hopefully give you some useful tips on how to do this really well and get on well in the exam. So this paper is a test of reading for comprehension and inference. Comprehension is understanding a text and being able to pick out details from it. This is all about reading really closely, looking for every detail you can possibly find. Inference is where you're looking for information that perhaps isn't stated directly, or where you're being asked to form a view of something which isn't clearly stated in the text, but which you can deduce using the information which is presented there. So this is the sort of question you'll have to face. It's got really important information in it, and you need to be clear about it before you start working. So we're told, imagine you are Mrs. Wilkie. This is important because you're given a perspective to write from. Now what this means is that you need to think about the information that's presented in the text from the point of view of this person. In this case, dear Mrs. Wilkie. The next job you have to do is understand what you're writing, in this case a letter, and the purpose of that, which is demanding that Sammy's place should be shut down. Then comes the crucial bit, the bullet points. There are 3 of them. The first one is our concerns about the conditions of the hostel. The second one is the mismanagement of the hostel. And the third one is the likely consequences of allowing the hostel to stay open. Now these are really important. This is the information you have to provide to the examiner to get any marks at all. It doesn't matter how great your writing is, if you don't hit these bullet points by providing relevant, well organised and clear details to support them, and lots of details for each one, you're not going to get a great mark. So we're told to base our letter on what we've read in passage A. Address all the bullet points. That's really important. If you don't address one of the bullet points, it's hard to get more than about 5 or 6 out of 15 for the writing part. And lastly this, use your own words. If you lift phrases or even single words from the text, you may find yourself losing marks. There's an instruction here about how to begin it. And a nice little detail here, look out for this. You may be given a word limit. It may say write 250 to 300 words. It may say write 1.5 to 2 sides. You've got to be careful and you've got to think about that. Lastly, 15 marks are for content. Again, what content here means is the number of details you can pick out from the text. 5 marks are for the quality of your writing. Focus on getting details from the text. The next thing is the bullet points, and these are the critical bit. I think in this piece of writing you should aim to write 3 paragraphs, 1 for each bullet point, and trying to make sure that each paragraph begins with a reference to the bullet point. Use the phrase from the bullet point to show that you've understood it. Use a phrase like, I am concerned about the conditions of the hostel, or the mismanagement of the hostel was clear to see, or the consequences of allowing this hostel to stay open are the following. So how should you go about this? Well, the first thing to do is read the question, as we've just done. We know what we're looking for. Read the whole text through all the way. Then read it again 2 or 3 more times, once for each of the bullet points. Highlight or underline relevant details. And a really good tip is to use a different colour for each of the bullet points. That's a really nice way of making sure that you can see later on which information you need. Now I'm going to recommend that you pause the video here and spend a bit of time reading the text, reading through it carefully and highlighting those details that you think are relevant. Make sure you're careful about choosing the ones that are actually relevant to the bullet points. For example, in this text we're told that the hostel is in a rundown area. Now that might seem like a nice relevant thing to write about, but I'm not actually sure it actually really does address any of the bullet points. So I'm going to delete that highlight. I don't think that's what we really need. However, things like chaotic and overcrowded information boards could be relevant to perhaps the bullet point about mismanagement. So I'm going to be quite choosy, but I'm looking really closely for information. Now I'm sure you've picked up lots of these details yourself, but let's just highlight 1 or 2 that I think are important. I think the obvious details about the condition of the hospital, there's a ton here. Like we've got thin, worn mattresses crammed together. We've got no shade in the light bulb. We've got light bulbs flickering. There's supposed to be people doing basic cleaning, but that's not happening. The window frame is welded shut. The surface is covered with flies. The surface of the sink is disgusting. There's cracks in it. There's mountain ranges of moulded from toothpaste. All of this stuff is relevant. I'm going to go through fairly quickly and highlight it. Now, we've got to this point, and this is where we perhaps need to be a little bit more choosy about some of the details. Look that the examination board will sometimes hide information in slightly sneaky places. Mrs. Wilkie tells us there's no one at reception. And that's a definite point we could make about mismanagement, isn't it? There's a few other things. There's a party going on. But I think lots of details, for example, the room was dirty, her mother caught a shoe in the carpet, there was a pillow which was like fear of disease, there's also a smell of gas, probably from a neighbouring establishment. We're also told, now that I think is a useful detail about the management, I'm going to hold that on for later. Kitchen sinks wouldn't clear, but there were no tea towels. And the other problem is there's lots of rats all around and about. So I'm really trying to look for details, look for things that could really make my writing interesting and show I've really read the text carefully. Now I've done this really quickly. When you're doing this in a real exam, you should be spending about 20 minutes planning your answer here. You've got 50 minutes for the whole question, spend 15 to 20 reading through and jotting down details to get as much as you can. So, the next job that we have to do is actually jot down these details. I think it's important that you actually jot them down, because if you just try and work from the highlighting on your text, you won't be able to necessarily write them in a really good order. So, concerns about the hostel, well, I've got the window welded shut. And you can see I'm making them really brief. I've got the torn carpet. I've got things like the light bulb, I've got rats, I've got gas, I've got what other details were significant for me. I've got the dirty sinks, I've got the chaotic notice board, there are overflowing sinks. The list goes on. Now, one thing is really important when you're planning, try to make sure you've got equal numbers of details for each of the bullet points, especially this last one here. I'll talk about that more in just a second. But your plan, use that first page on the answer booklet to scribble out your plan and jot down all the details. That way I can decide, or when you're writing you can decide the best order to put the things in. It may be that the first detail you find in the text isn't the most interesting or relevant one to start with. I might actually start, for example, add this in with the rats. I think any public health officer would want to know about that first, and the gas. Details about torn carpet or a light bulb or the crammed rooms could come later. Now that bottom bullet point's the hard one. You've probably noticed as you read through the text there wasn't any mention of consequences, but this is where you need to use your intelligence. I've got a hotel that's surrounded by rats. Well, a consequence of a hotel surrounded by rats might be actually that we could have disease being spread. We might also have the danger of an explosion from the gas leaks. This is that final bullet point. It's very often the one where you're asked to put details together and try and think logically about what you've read. So this is the kind of writing you're being expected to produce. Dear Public Health Officer, I'm writing to alert you to a health and safety hazard. When I arrived at the hostel, I was shocked to find unsanitary conditions such as unsafe electronics and overfull bedrooms. I'm trying to pack in as many details as I possibly can, and I'm showing the examiner I've read the text carefully and closely. But a really good answer will develop points. And it's really important you try and do this at regular points in your answer. So, you might write something like this. I'm writing to alert you to a health and safety hazard. When I arrived at the hostel, I was shocked to find unsanitary conditions, such as unsafe electronics and overfull bedrooms. Those are the details. I'm concerned the electrics could cause a fire, and in a crowded room, people would not be able to escape. That's where you're taking the details in the text and developing them a little bit in a logical way. Try to do this every paragraph. Show that you've understood the details and why they matter. Simply putting details in a paragraph shows me that you can pick them out. Developing shows me that you understand them. So the final bullet point, as we've mentioned, is the one that requires inference. It's that knotty word. The point is we've not been told directly in the text what are the consequences of allowing this hotel to stay open. What we have to do is think about what we've read and try and work it out for ourselves. Well, I'm thinking, for me, there are three main consequences of allowing this hotel to stay open, possible consequences. Number one, people might get hurt. You've got trip hazards in the carpets. You've got overflowing sinks. And we've got out-of-date food. There's a risk of an explosion. There's gas, for goodness sake. And lastly, all these details about buying second-hand cars and slightly dodgy visa arrangements. I'm thinking a young person could fall foul of the law really easily here. And this is where I'm showing that I've put details together. I can make an intelligent judgment of what the information in this text is telling me, and that's inference. So let's have a look at an example of a paragraph for the third bullet point. As you can see, I've started it here with a sentence that links back to the bullet point. If this hostel stays open, I predict that. I'm writing about the consequences. Someone will get hurt. And what I'm trying to do with each detail I include, I'm supporting it with details from the text. And it's so important you do that. You can make all these nice points for the third bullet point, but unless they're supported with details, you can't get credit for them. I've said either through electrocution or tripping on an ancient carpet. I use a word like moreover to link my ideas. The whole place could go up like a bomb. This is me trying to adopt a little bit of Mrs. Wilkie's voice. She's quite a strident, confident woman, and she's going to use some fairly bold, expressive writing. And I'm linking that to the smell of gas. Lastly, she fears the incompetent management will end up getting someone's daughter the wrong travel documents, which could leave them falling foul of the law. The whole place must be closed. This is a strong statement showing I've understood every detail in the text. So, some top tips for doing really well on this exam. Make sure you spend time reading and planning. I think 15 to 20 minutes here. You've got the time, so use it to really look closely at the text. Remember, you are being marked on content and the number of details you can recover from the text, not simply producing a nice bit of writing that sounds good. Include details from the text, link every point to a detail, and pack the details in 6 or 7 for each bullet point. Use your own words, and then make sure that if there's a third bullet point there that requires inference, and it's very likely there will be, support your points with details from the text. Show that your inferences are based on details. And that's about it. It's a straightforward question, this one, if you do what you're told. The crucial thing for me, and it keeps coming back to that, it's this word details. The best answers are the ones that have looked really, really closely at the text and found really interesting details to write about. If you can do that, I'm sure you're going to get a fantastic mark. Best of luck to you.